All right, Dan, we're at that part of camp settling in a little bit, getting a bit into routine. And, of course, there's offensive linemen still being moved around. And now Mustipher is back at center. What is the impact of the Patrick injury and everything else that's going on up front?
Yeah, well, with the Patrick injury, you're just trying to figure out what a stopgap is until he can get back. The luxury you have is you have last year's starting center, Sam Mustipher, able to take those reps, able to give you some comfort there at that position as you wait for Lucas Patrick's right hand and thumb to heal up. And so they've at least got a veteran guy with some experience as a starter in there to stabilize things. Doug Kramer also getting some first-team reps through this camp. And it's a lot of mixing and matching, as you mentioned, a lot of roles open and a lot of guys to try and fill them. And so what we're seeing out here is the byproduct of that mixing and matching, which at times is a pass rush that gets home really quickly and makes things very difficult on Justin Fields.
Dan, what's your read on the Tevin Jenkins situation?
My read is that it's a little bit odd right now, and that if you are a player who missed 4+ months of your rookie season, you didn't practice, right, at all during those 4 months, you missed 12 games during the season. The biggest thing you need to show a new coaching staff and a new regime is, one, that you're available, and two, that you're good, right? And when you're away from the team, the way Tevin has been away from the team since last Thursday, you can't show either of those things. And so I think for our purposes, it's a story that needs to be monitored and kept track of. But I think in the big picture, you can kind of scratch Tevin Jenkins out of the plans for at least September for the Bears, because they've got a lot to figure out, and they're not going to figure it out with a guy who's not practicing and not showing this coaching staff and this regime what he's made of. And so we'll keep our fingers on the pulse of that. But for right now, it's an absentee from a guy who was absent a lot in 2021.
How would a young offensive lineman impress this coaching staff?
With availability, with effort, with the ability to be a tone setter, right? And that's why you see a guy like Braxton Jones taken on day 3 of the draft in April, getting the looks he's getting, because he's a smart player. He's a guy that is very, very sturdy. I tweeted last week that there are times in one-on-ones where there is a just sturdiness to him, where a guy comes in on a bull rush and he does not move. He just stiffens the guy and holds his own. And so there's something there to be developed there. And so to your question, this regime, both coaching staff and front office, wants nasty guys up front. They want nasty guys that prove it on a daily basis and don't just talk about it, that can be tone setters. And so they'll put together the best 5 they can for week 1, and they'll also probably tell you in week 1 that that's not going to necessarily be the offensive line that they're going to get to week 18 with, because they've got a lot to figure out and a lot of the future to plan, right? And you can plug Riley Reif in and feel comfortable with him as your starter, but you also have to be developing for the future. And so if you can do those things simultaneously, which I think they can with Reif and Braxton Jones, now you can try to kind of accomplish 2 things at once.
I've been watching the wide receivers as much as I can, and I know it's weird because when I see video in my timeline, or when my son shows me video from his Instagram feed, that it's already selected for reasons. So I'm not getting like raw film that I'm watching. But I will tell you, Velus Jones has a little bit of that extra, that gear, that real effective game speed thing. My concern is when he comes in the game, the opponent's like, he's getting the ball. And whatever package it may be, you're not putting him in there to do something other than get the ball. How are they going to find the right number of plays and the right ways to use him where there can still be a little bit of mystery?
So really good question. First of all, thank you for acknowledging that the videos you see on Twitter are selected, because I tweeted something out on Friday that the offense had a clunky day, and it was another bit of clunkiness to a clunky week. And I got replies on Twitter then saying, all I'm seeing on Twitter is highlights. And you're like, right. Yeah, that's what Twitter is. Nobody is showing you the incomplete pass. None of the fans that are out here are going to their timelines and throwing those things in there. But as it relates to Velus Jones, the highlight you probably saw, maybe it was Saturday, was him in one-on-ones, juking a defensive back and then separating by about 7 yards in an instant, right? It was at 0 to 60 with one press of the gas. And that stuff's impressive. Now, here's what I think Luke Getsy sees. I think he sees a guy that he wants to pile as much on his plate as he can in order to do exactly the opposite of what you're saying, to have him on the field for when he's not getting the ball, to have him there as a chess piece that then opens up matchups for other guys. And if you can find that role, right, and you think about Tariq Cohen in his first 2 years and the way the Bears were able to use him as that matchup guy that created, he could come out of the backfield and find a matchup on a linebacker, and that's why he had 150-plus catches his first 2 years. but he could also do some things that made the defense pay attention to him. And now all of a sudden things were open for a receiver across the field or a tight end coming across the formation. And so that's the goal. And that's the goal these next 6 weeks, is to find something for Velus that allows him to be productive within your offense, but also allows him to get on the field in a way that makes other people productive as well.
Dan, what's the philosophy of this coaching staff when it comes to padded practices? Because I know some coaches are like, we want to do heavy stuff early on and then back off as we get closer to the preseason games. Some coaches are like, oh, it's valuable early, but maybe, we can go a little longer so the guys are ready to hit. Where do you think this group of coaches, where do they lie on that spectrum when it comes to padded practices?
We are going to learn that this week. It's a closed practice today. I'm not sure how much I can share with you now, but I will tell you that they're still in shells today, right? And so the padded practices will begin this week, and we've got to learn about how much Matt Eberflus is willing to push it and how much he wants to learn from those, because they've been very emphatic since camp opened and really into the summer about talking about how much they need to learn about this football team in pads, right? Particularly on the lines, and then also just the feel of an offense needs pads, right? You need to understand how the timing and the flow of things work when there's actual football being played and not just 7-on-7 and 1-on-1s and those types of things. So this is going to be a telling week to see how much Matt wants to push that, how much that Hicks philosophy comes into play, and just where they're willing to go with that. And I think we'll learn a lot as the week goes on about where they are on that spectrum and how much they'll kind of hit the brakes when they get into next week. You got to remember, next week they got an off day on Monday, followed by Family Fest, which is traditionally a lighter practice at Soldier Field, then just 2 days of practice, and then you're on to your preseason game against the Chiefs. So this would be the week, right, to test those things out and see how hard they're going to go.
Whenever you have a new regime, you always try to figure out how do guys from the old regime fit in. In some cases, like Tevin Jenkins, I feel like he doesn't quite fit what they want to do. In other cases, I feel like I'm hearing them say a lot of positive things about Cole Kmet. So are they, number one? And number two, does he fit what their ideal tight end looks like and plays like?
So I'll preface this by saying I've been wrong before, and I was most wrong about Anthony Miller in my analysis of this football team. And that, for a guy that passed my eye test and I thought was on the on-ramp to, heavy production and significant contributions in the offense, I see that right now for Cole Kmet, not just in the way they're talking about him, but the way they're utilizing him and the way they understand that he can be a difference maker for them, both in the passing game and in the running game. And if you can do those two things well, and now they can play off one another, now all of a sudden you've got a tight end in this offense that can be a weapon for you. I think they're very optimistic about where he can go in 2022. I think they're trying to figure out how can we unlock him in the red zone a little bit more and make him a guy that can be a go-to guy for Fields when you get in close to scoring territory. I feel really strongly about where Cole Kmet's arrow is pointing up. Again, I could be wrong, but right now at this point of camp, that's a guy I believe heavily in.
Do you buy the conventional wisdom that the developmental curve for tight ends is a little bit steeper because of how much they have to know about the passing game and the running game? And I'm wondering if there isn't extra burden on him unlearning whatever Matt Nagy was trying to do and now learning this that multiplies that factor.
I think if you talk to Cole and you talk to people in this building, you see that the biggest burden that Cole has right now is trying to develop continuity and timing with a starting quarterback. You got to remember, he was drafted during a COVID year in which there was no rookie camp. There was no mini camp. There was no OTAs. There was a abbreviated training camp. And so his ability to sort of get his feet on the ground as a rookie was delayed. And then all of a sudden in your first 2 years, you go from Mitch to Nick, back to Mitch, to Andy, to Justin, back to Nick, back to Andy, right? And there's been no continuity at all at any point in Cole's career where he's been able to work with the same quarterback repeatedly and consistently and develop that timing. He tells us last week, listen, I've been working with Justin since the spring, and you start to see the fruits of that labor come out here on the practice field where you can catch a deep ball down the seam and you know exactly where Justin wants you to position your body and where he's going to deliver that ball. And if you can develop that feel and that timing with the quarterback, that should be your catalyst, right, for success in this league. And so I think that's where Cole's mindset is. I think your point is very well taken on a general level that there is a lot to learn and unlearn at that position. But I think for Cole, more than anything in 2022, it's about can he get on the same page and the same timing rhythm with Justin Fields.
How much does it let us know how important they think the nickel position is, that they're like, well, we drafted Kyler Gordon and we're going to put him in nickel when we need to?
Well, so one of the questions I asked last week, Laurence, was how much does Kyler's willingness to go inside there influence the role that you're carving out for him? Because Kyler Gordon has been very emphatic, in the spring and again last week and saying, I love playing in the nickel. There's just something about it that suits me. I've got a vision that suits it in there. I've got a feel for the game that suits me in there. And so his eagerness to get in there, I think, has convinced the coaching staff that, listen, if you want to put a guy with playmaking skills in a position he's most comfortable in, let's go ahead and roll those dice. Now I think the question is, are you going to play him outside in your base defense and then slide him inside with Kindle Vildor coming in outside, when you go into sub packages, or are you going to try to start the year with Vildor as your second outside corner and only use Gordon as your nickel and see how that evolves? I think this kid has just shown an ability and a fearlessness to go in there. And early on in my time covering the league, I covered one of the best nickels there ever was in Antoine Winfield. And I'm not comparing Kyler to that, but you sense with guys that are very comfortable at that position and guys who are playing it because the coaching staff asked them to play it, if that makes any sense. And I think Kyler is more of the former, where he's very comfortable and very instinctive in there, and the Bears are trying to use that to their advantage.
There was a minor personnel news note today that I saw from Brad Biggs that normally I wouldn't think is a big deal, and maybe it's not. But Carl Piekarski retired yesterday. Anybody who's around the Bears, his nickname is Hyde, and he was in his role as assistant equipment manager under Tony Medlin back when I was on the beat. I think he was a ball boy as far back as 1980. And when Ryan Poles takes over an organization, and he's still in the process of going through some of this stuff. I especially for some of these long-time grandfathered in parts of the Bears organization that had almost been like furniture. I mean, we used to go through the media guide every year and be like, I've seen that guy. What does he do? And nobody could say, I don't know what he does. I'm not sure. It would say administration. And it would be a guy you saw around because he was just like a legacy Bears employee. What does it mean if Poles is reshaping the organization maybe down a level or a couple levels deeper than perhaps we envisioned?
I can't say for certain how much Ryan Poles was involved in Carl Piekarski's retirement. I can say that since he got here, he has made it very clear that he has identified the number of flaws that are inside this building and isn't afraid to shake things up and change them. And I think all three of us would agree on the air, on the record right here, that that's a good thing for this organization, to get rid of some of that organizational complacency that's been existent for way too long and is a reason that they don't win on a regular basis. That the last time they had 3 consecutive winning seasons was back in the 80s, right? And so if you have a guy at the top who's willing to be fearless and willing to make changes that he believes benefit the organization long term, then give him that green light. The second part of that is are the moves that Ryan Poles are making going to help this team turn the corner? That's a long process that we're going to have to wait and see. But certainly there's been some notable exits here in the last few months.
How do you think Justin Fields is acclimated to this being his team? And what are some of the telltale signs that you're looking at or looking for to prove that that's the case?
I think Justin's acclimation to this being his team has been very natural and very impressive. Now, the next step is acclimating to this offense in a way that it can be competitive, right, and better and actually productive on game days. And from what I've seen through the first week of camp, this thing is, as I mentioned earlier, it's really, really clunky right now. And I think Bears fans better be ready for a September that is not a rocket ship to stardom for Justin Fields, right, that is going to have moments where there are some passes that are way away from the intended target, where there's some jailbreaks up front on the offensive line, and you can't make something out of nothing. And there's just a lot of work that needs to be done here. I think Justin as a leader is on the right track, right? And his ability to take ownership and take the steering wheel and communicate with the guys around him, including the coaching staff, has been impressive. Now it's got to translate into something on the field. And through the early stretches of camp, there haven't been enough, as Dan said, those undeniable moments of greatness to offset the moments where you start scratching your head and say, oh boy, are we looking at a 25th ranked offense again? Is
there anyone outside of anyone that you've mentioned already that's caught your eye with detail or technique or play in these practices?
Well, an obvious one is Darnell Mooney, right? Like, I think that's a guy that you say, boy, this guy really, we can have the debate all we want on whether he's a true 1 or a 1A or maybe a 2. Darnell Mooney's going to squeeze every ounce of potential in his body out of himself, and Bears fans should be ecstatic about that, right? If that whatever that gets you in the long run, you'll know that Darnell Mooney reached his ceiling. And you see it every day out here with the way he practices, with the way he produces. I think that's a guy I would make note of. I'll tell you a guy from the rookie class that didn't do really anything in the spring as he was coming back from an injury and is really impressed in one-on-ones and 7-7 situation. It's Elijah Hicks, the safety. Guy has a knack for the ball. He's got an ability to break on things and has shown a juice and sort of a charisma that becomes infectious to the number 2 defense, right? And so that's a guy, again, when you're looking beyond 2022 and you're saying, are there pieces here that can be major contributors on your next championship team? That's a guy from the early parts that I've at least put a highlighter on and said, let's watch him a little bit more over this next month and see where he goes.
I enjoyed reading Colleen Kane's big Sunday piece about the history of Matt Eberflus. And I don't know that I ever remembered a journalist talking to a Chicago Bears head coach's mother this deeply, this broadly about his upbringing. Did you learn anything you didn't know about Eberflus from that?
I did, and I told Colleen when I read the draft, but I said, listen, I cover the Chicago Bears on a full-time basis, as you know, sitting next to me all the time. And I felt like I really enjoyed that piece as a sort of spotlight shined on what makes Matt tick and why it's been that way. And so I think she did a wonderful job. For those who haven't read it, get to chicagotribune.com as soon as you can and read that piece, because I think there's a lot that you're gonna learn about Matt, and a lot that's going to be about Matt that's going to be put to the test here, right, in the next couple weeks, in the next couple months. I think there's justifiable skepticism in the outside world about can he lead the way he wants to in this market, in this organization, and get high-level results. I think there are questions about how long this is going to last. But I think from the outset, at least you know what he's about, right? And you at least know what the philosophy is and what he's trying to squeeze out of his football team. And now it's up to us to chronicle whether it works or not.
Yeah, the boil down for me was, if I had to put 2 words on Matt Eberflus, true believer. Like, this is not a bit. This is not an act. This is not something he layers over. Like, this guy, I don't know if he believes that he's been hand selected by higher forces to lead the Chicago Bears to be the best that they can be, but there is a level to this of genuine belief. And if that translates, if that matters, I have no idea, but it certainly came through.
Well, I think at the very least, he believes that his life experiences and his coaching experiences have made him ready to take this swing, right? And I think that's very clear in the way he carries himself and the way he stands in front of the room, that he believes he is more than ready to take on this swing. One thing that's caught my ear really in the last week and a half is the number of times that he says in press conferences that you can't walk past mistakes. And that's a staple of things that Matt Eberflus talks about. It's a staple of what his coaching staff is now talking about regularly, that if a mistake is made, even if it's in individual drills and it's just a small thing, you can't walk past it. You have to point it out, and there has to be sort of a tact and a constructive way in which you point it out so that it doesn't become this daily needling of players that wears people out in a hurry. And so that's, I think, where he's going to have to walk that tightrope of understanding how to be really, really strict about what he wants while not becoming annoying to pros that are going to be like, all right, dude, we get it. Like, I know what you want. I just made a mistake on that rep. You don't have to call everything out. And so that's the next step for Matt to try to figure out where this whole thing goes. And it's going to be fun to watch because one way or another, we're going to have results to see what he gets out of that philosophy.